Tanse, I'm Chris Nachkate. Welcome to APTN National News Daytime on this Monday. An Indigenous man has died after he was admitted as a patient at Royal University Hospital in Saskatoon. The family says he was recently diagnosed with cancer. According to the Saskatchewan Health Authority, last Friday, 36-year-old Trevor Dubois was in a patient room when Health Authority Protective Services officers were called after staff reported a safety concern involving Dubois. The SHA says a physical altercation occurred between the patient and officers, and the patient became unresponsive. Medical staff responded to provide care, however, he was pronounced deceased. The SHA is now conducting an investigation into the death of the patient. SHA says it takes the incident extremely seriously and is committed to accountability. The family of Trevor Dubois held a press conference this morning in Saskatoon regarding the incident. APTN's Rachel May will have more in your evening newscast. An update now to the Canadian military being deployed to Pimichikamak Cree Nation in northern Manitoba. This is regarding the fallout after a Manitoba hydro power line snapped on December 28th, creating a power outage that left the community in the cold and dark for close to 5 days. On Sunday, Pimichikamak Chief David Monias announced that a team of 7 military personnel arrived in Pimichikamak over the weekend. The team includes engineering specialists and communication support. The chief says the team of seven's role will be to assess priority infrastructure needs and determine the next steps. A second technical assessment team is expected to arrive on Wednesday, and they may bring additional equipment depending on the situation. Meanwhile, Pimichikamak is contacting Indigenous Services Canada and the Red Cross for a temporary water treatment plant, while the permanent water and sewer infrastructure can be fixed. A 30-person mobile camp is also being brought in to address accommodation concerns for the trades workers making repairs. In a statement, Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs Grand Chief Kyra Wilson thanked the federal government, adding, "This was not a natural disaster. This was a preventable infrastructure failure. When a First Nation needs military assistance just to restore basic living conditions, it points to a system that failed to invest early and responsibly. We appreciate the work being done on the ground right now, but emergency deployments cannot become the standing response to chronic infrastructure gaps in Northern First Nations. Reliable power, safe water, and resilient systems are not optional. They are basic responsibilities." There was a round dance for Pimichikamak Cree Nation outside the Manitoba Legislature on Thursday. Pimichikamak is still in a state of emergency almost 2 weeks after a power outage in the community caused frozen and bursting water pipes, flooded basements, and a community-wide evacuation. APTN's Julia Ross reports.
A state of emergency. Why? Because a willful decision at all levels of government not to act. 11 days this community had to sit watching their house and sewage pour. Why? Because of failure to act. When I look at statements from the federal government that they are entering the recovery stage, I'm telling you, nothing could be further from the truth.
Winnipeg Centre MP Leah Gazan says she was asked by the Pimichikamak Chief and Council to come to their community on Wednesday to provide political and human rights oversight. Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew, a number of Grand Chiefs, and Federal Northern Affairs Minister Rebecca Chartrand were also in the community Wednesday. Gazan says the Liberal government in Ottawa is willfully failing the community.
Not only is there a state emergency now, but because of a willful failure to act by all levels of government. They have issues with their water treatment plant now. They have raw sewage that is freezing on the ground that will thaw in the summer. We could be on the verge of a water crisis in Pimichikamak worse than Walkerton.
Band councillor Shirley Robinson said she traveled back to Pimichikamak for the first time Wednesday.
I went in and out. I didn't even get to see my house to assess my own home. But I came back here because our people are displaced. They're lonely. Our elders are crying. They miss home. The children to be secluded in four walls, that's not healthy.
Robinson says that the community is struggling without water and that she hopes to pressure the government to act now instead of later. Currently, Pimachikamak has evacuated members across Manitoba.
4,000 plus people displaced, and our community is just under 10,000. That's almost half our nation displaced, and being displaced is traumatizing.
This is the second evacuation for Pimachikamak members in 1 year. The first was last summer due to the worst wildfire season ever recorded in Manitoba. There is no timeline for when people will be able to return home to sleep on their own beds. Julia Ross, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
We have more news after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back. A member of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues was one of 17 Indigenous leaders whose homes were searched by Russian authorities. This according to the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Climate Change, or IIPRC. And as APTN's Angel Moore reports, the co-chair of the IIPRC was also arrested and detained.
This is last spring at the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, where thousands of leaders, activists, and organizations gather to discuss Indigenous issues. Valentina Saukiva is Sami and an advocate for Indigenous rights. She is a member of the forum and was re-elected for the 2026-2028 term. Last December, Saukina says her home in Russia was raided by the Federal Security of the Russian Federation. She spoke to APTN News in Russian from Norway. The answer is on the surface. I think it's for our activism, for our concerns for the fate of our nations. We always were the voice of our peoples and peoples who live on the territory of Russia. So it was the intimidation campaign. Daria Yegoreva is Selkup, an indigenous group in Siberia and co-chair of the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Climate Change, IIPFCC. She has attended the last 3 COPs, an annual summit where countries meet to discuss climate change. IIPFCC says Yegoreva's home was also searched by Russian authorities, and she was arrested for allegedly participating in a terrorist organization.
Не должна быть безнадежной, и она должна привести к спасению. И я очень поддерживаю Дашу Егореву, и я переживаю в плане того, что как она себя сейчас чувствует, потому что мы на самом деле не знаем, что происходит.
We don't actually know what's going on right now and what kind of pressure she's under when a person is under arrest. Our solidarity and close attention is with her from all of the people who can support her now. The International Indian Treaty Council, that represents over 98 nations from North and South America, released a statement. This is a grave case of intimidation and reprisal against an Indigenous leader in direct connection with her participating in the UNFCCC process. The International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Climate Change said in a press release that this is a targeted attack on Indigenous leaders who participate in United Nations processes and advocate for Indigenous rights. Some people have claimed asylum after being monitored by Russian authorities. Luda Kinuk is originally from northeastern Russia, but she obtained asylum in 2017 in the United States and now lives in Hawaii.
They started questioning 38 of my family and friends. Like they were inviting them to their office, to the base, and started. And one of my friends actually confessed to me saying that he was reporting to them every day what I had for lunch, who I saw that day. So just complete. So I realized it's better for my family if I'm just not there.
IIPFCC says Yegoreva may be detained for 2 months while being investigated and may face 10 to 20 years in prison. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Jabutuk, also called Halifax.
The Trump administration is wasting no time making headlines this year, starting off with the invasion of Venezuela and capture of Nicolas Maduro. Now the administration is turning its attention to Greenland, threatening a takeover of the autonomous territory of Denmark for what the U.S. calls national security purposes. And Trump says he's not opposed to using military force to make that happen. So where does that leave Canada in all of this, especially in the north? Here to talk to us more about Arctic security is Ken Coates, Professor Emeritus of the Johnson Shoyama Graduate School of Public Policy at the University of Saskatchewan.
Ken, thanks so much for joining us today. To start, what are your thoughts about the Trump administration's recent actions and threats of invasion? Is this something Canadians should be concerned about?
Canadians should be concerned about it, but it's hard to know what we should be concerned about, and which is a strange way of answering the question. We're living in the most uncertain of all times. We have a president of the United States who's completely unpredictable, who goes madly off in all directions, who invades Venezuela one day and then makes claims against Greenland the next day and talks about buying half of the continent. This is insane. And we've never, ever dealt with anything quite like this. There's so many norms of international relations and diplomacy and government action. President Trump is ignoring all of them. And of course, he has a whole series of domestic crises going on at the same time. And so it makes it really hard to know what to do. And at this point, Canada must decide what its own roles and ambitions are, has to protect its own integrity and its own sovereignty. But right now, we're not doing a particularly good job of that either.
And how prepared is Canada to defend the Arctic?
Let's just say that if you and 10 friends decided to go with your hunting rifles up to Nunavut or Northwest Territories or the Yukon, you'd have a free rein. We have some wonderful folks up there. The Canadian Rangers are extremely competent. They're very well trained. They go out on the land all the time. They're a great set of eyes that sort of cover all the north and do a really excellent job. But the reality of it is that Canada, the Canadian North, is perhaps one of the most unprotected areas on the planet. Now, the Department of National Defense very appropriately will tell you that we actually have it all covered, that we have radar systems shared with the United States through NORAD. We have sort of response systems through airplanes that are based in Cold Lake, Alberta or Petawawa, Ontario. And we can get up there and do some things. But the reality of it is that the Arctic is pretty much undefensible. What do you do? If somebody wants to attack you by land, where are they going to come from? If they're going to come in by submarine, well, we have the longest coastline in the world, and we can't possibly manage all of that. If they come in by air, we haven't got enough planes that can actually go up and sort of stop somebody from doing that. So there's no obvious way. It's not to criticize the government of Canada, it's to respect the fact that we don't really know what to do. We don't have a clear A, B, C, D, E sort of response that would make this thing much better off. What we haven't done, and this is the one thing Canada can do, is reassure the people of Canada that we have their backs. Reassure the people of the North in particular that the government of Canada is on their side and willing to do whatever it can to protect it in cases of any kind of invasion or assault on our sovereignty. And it's hard to say that we've done that. It's a decent military base now in Yellowknife. The Yukon has, I think, 4 permanent members in the entire territory. It's just tiny. Nunavut has almost nothing. So, we can do a lot more to reassure the people of the North that, in fact, there's something in place. And I'll add a really quick thing. One of the most important areas in the country is actually from Labrador to northern British Columbia. It's across the provincial north. And when we talk about the North, we always talk about the Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. Very important. We never say anything about the provincial North. And that area has a substantial Indigenous population. It has much of the country's resource wealth. Strategically and economically, it's more important than the territorial North. And we don't even talk about it. So we always say, well, what are we going to do for Caledon? What are we going to do for Yellowknife? What do we do for Whitehorse? Nobody ever says, what are we going to do for Churchill or for Thompson or for La Ronge or for any of these other Labrador City? We don't even talk about the provincial North. And that's actually where some of our vulnerability is the greatest.
And how would you say Canada compares in this area to other northern countries like Finland, Sweden, or Norway? What are they doing that we're not?
So the Scandinavian countries, the Nordic countries, are doing much, much better than we are for good reasons. Russia's right there. Norway and Finland both share borders with Russia. If you go and look at northern Norway, it's right across the border, and there's hundreds of thousands of people within 150 miles. Finland has a very long border with Russia, and they have military bases, almost every 100 miles along the entire road. And Norway and Sweden and Finland have spent a lot of money on air defense, but the distances are much shorter. They can work collaboratively. They have all three countries willing to sort of collaborate together, plus with NATO and things like that. So they have, in one sense, an easier job, but a more dangerous job, because the Russians are on their doorstep, and they're on their doorstep every single day. So the people of the Nordic countries live with the reality and the threat of sort of Russia's penetration all the time. The better analogy would be Australia. Australia has this huge outback. It points up toward Indonesia, so toward China, I guess, indirectly, toward India. They do a much, much better job. Darwin area around the Northern Territory has a much larger military establishment than any place in the Canadian North. They have military bases sort of across the region. We can do so much better, particularly, and I emphasize this, particularly if we look for what are called joint use projects, where we actually say, let's build the infrastructure so we actually have a fully protected and fully prepared area. Electricity, internet connectivity, having proper airports and facilities in the area, having search and rescue capabilities across the whole region. That's where our deficiencies really, really stand out. So if Canada really wanted to get ready for all of this, we would actually do those things quickly, and we would bring the far north up to Canadian standards in all those key infrastructure areas, so that if something did happen, we could actually move troops and supplies and other activities into these areas quickly. So we are sort of, the race is getting ready to start, and we're still sitting back in the changing room trying to get our shorts on, and you really can't compete with other countries when you're doing that kind of thing, when you're so far behind the starting blocks. I hope the race never starts. We have to pray and work hard to make sure the race never actually takes off. But you cannot compete if you actually haven't got the preparation done, and that's the problem we have right now.
Great insights on there, Ken. We'll have to leave it there for today, but thank you so much for taking some time and joining us today.
Anytime.
Thank you, Savannah and Ken. We now want to give you the results to last week's web poll questions. Our first question was, would you be prepared if your electricity went out for multiple days? 41% of you voted yes and 59% said no. Our second question was, did you make a New Year's resolution? 32% said yes and 68% said no. And our final question was, where do you mainly find your news? 29% said social media, 44% said news websites, 1% said a newspaper or newsletter. The same goes for podcasts with only 1%. 13% said TV, and 12% said other. Thanks for taking the time to cast your votes. Go to our website at aptnnews.ca to see this week's new poll questions. We'll be right back after this commercial break. Thanks for staying with us. One of the rare studies Quebec conducted on the impacts of residential schools marks its 10th anniversary. Our APTN journalist Stephanie Dasev wanted to see how the findings of this study have translated into reality since 2016.
And what we see is that those who went to residential schools, or when their parents went to residential schools, they suffer more.
Researcher Jacinthe Dion co-wrote the study back in 2016. She recently looked back at its findings.
They have more psychological distress, more alcohol or drug abuse, so it's more difficult for them.
She sought to understand the impact of residential schools on 300 First Nations people.
We found that a third of them have suffered from sexual abuse during childhood. A third of them also have suffered from physical abuse, and they are also exposed, to 60% of them were exposed to intimate violence.
In the research done a decade ago, Dion concluded that a holistic approach with treatments that are culturally appropriate and that take into account cultural and Indigenous identity would be most effective. So what's happened since the study was first released? Well, Montreal welcomed the first Indigenous Family Health Clinic in April 2024.
La clinique est née d'un événement malheureux suite au décès de Joyce Echaquan.
Yvick Olek is the Health and Wellness Director at Native Montreal.
Le médecin et l'infirmière vont prendre beaucoup plus de temps avec les personnes afin de vraiment créer un lien thérapeutique. Puis d'acquérir la confiance, parce qu'une des choses qui bloquait l'accessibilité, c'était pas juste une accessibilité physique, c'était la méfiance, la complexité du système.
The clinic also offers treatment by traditional healers, which, according to Yvick, may also be recommended by doctors. The treatment takes place in the Cedar Room, where we find Tili Gassanisax, a Mohawk from Ganawage.
So not everybody wants a smudge.
Tili takes the time to build trust and adapts to the needs of the individual.
I ask, is this something that you would like? And then slowly, bit by bit, the other person will open up, start talking a little bit about themselves, and eventually we'll figure out what it is, what the purpose of this little meeting that we would have together.
She has been working with elder Sidalia Fazio from Ganawage. For 20 years, Fazio taught Tili about culture and traditions. Tili realized the importance of connection and having a safe space to share.
So if people can talk, if people can cry, that's letting it out. That's getting everything that's inside here, that chance to breathe, to be let go and allow that space to breathe.
According to 2024 statistics, 2,500 Indigenous people received treatment in one of the 8 clinics associated with a friendship center in Quebec. Despite the services offered, Dion emphasizes that more efforts are needed to educate non-Indigenous people about the lived experience by Indigenous people.
They should intervene with what we call the cultural safety approach. So they need to take care of who they are, what is their identity, the Indigenous identity, all their culture. They need to take that into consideration. So yes, it's better, but we need to work again more to train all of those people.
I have a wonderful adoption. My mother did the very, very the best for me.
Having been adopted during the 60s scoop, Tili is part of the Bear Clan. She herself was not connected to her people, but working with the community has brought her closer to her roots.
That was like a storm cloud above my head for many, many years. And it felt to be a troubled place until I realized that Creator knows who I am. And that storm cloud produces water. Water's cleansing, water's healing.
Stéphanie Desève, APTN National News, Montreal.
And that's your daytime newscast for this Monday, January 12th. We're back again for your evening newscast in a few hours. Please join us then. Hi, miigwech masicho. Thank you for watching. We'll see you again. Ekse.